Border wall battle, the latest on the lawsuits against the president's national emergency declaration. Campaign 2020 is in full swing. A look at people jumping into the race and some of the biggest issues they're expected to face. And a shocking report on sexual abuse inside the church. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The battle over the border wall is heading to court. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. Well, 16 states are suing President Trump over his national emergency declaration. The declaration helps the president fund his wall with Mexico.
But some lawmakers are hoping the lawsuits will put the brakes on the commander-in-chief's plan to free up funding for his border wall. With more on this story, let's go to White House correspondent Ben Kennedy, who's at the North Lawn. Ben?
Well, John and Jenna, that lawsuit was filed in U.S. District Court for Northern California. Joining the Golden State was Colorado, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and a handful of other states. Now, they argue the president lacks power under Constitution to allocate funds for constructing a wall along the border because Congress retains the spending power. In the complaint, the states call President Trump's national emergency made up. Lawmakers agreed to $1.4 billion in border barriers to avoid another partial government shutdown, but President Trump said that's not enough. The emergency declaration allowed Trump to tap into funding from other government agencies to the tune of $8 billion. He said the barrier will stop the influx of illegal drugs, gangs, and human traffickers from crossing into the country. Today, he doubled down on his remarks from the Rose Garden last week that he predicted this case would, in fact, go to court.
Well, I think I called it exactly, right? Including the fact that they would put them into the Ninth Circuit. That's where they put them in. And I think we'll do very well. We have absolute right to do that. I have an absolute right to call national security. We need strong borders. We have to stop drugs and crime and criminals and human trafficking, and we have to stop all of those things that a strong wall will stop.
The president is at the beginning of that legal battle, and for a bit of insight into what's ahead, I spoke to John Malcolm with the Heritage Foundation. Well, John, more than a dozen states have filed a lawsuit challenging President Trump's emergency declaration. Kind of walk me through how will this play out in court?
Sure. Well, actually, there have been 3 lawsuits filed, 2 here in the District of Columbia, and then California is leading, I think, a group of 16 states have filed in northern California. So they are challenging the president's declaration of a national emergency. We'll have to read these lawsuits, but they're saying essentially that he didn't have the authority under the National Emergencies Act.
Aside from these lawsuits, Congress is also likely to vote to stop the emergency declaration. Is there enough support to override a veto?
No, I don't think so. So I think that there clearly would be a majority in the House that will support a joint resolution. There might be a majority in the Senate. I think that's probably doubtful too, but there might be a majority in the Senate to pass a joint resolution to nullify the president's declaration. The president would veto this in all likelihood, and I don't see the votes there, 2/3 in the House and the Senate, to override that veto.
So, John, bottom line, there are a lot of factors at play, no doubt, but how long could this get dragged out? Is it possible the wall, or what he's calling a barrier now, won't even begin building before the 2020 election?
Well, it's possible. I mean, if one of these judges were to enter a nationwide injunction preventing the president from acting, it may be a while before that injunction got lifted, if it ever got lifted. Again, most of this money did not require a declaration of a national emergency, so I'm not quite sure how a court would deal with that. But, while courts are reluctant to second-guess presidents with respect to national emergency or national security issues, a lot of lower courts did not show any such reluctance during the travel ban litigation. And I suspect that there may be some judges that will be similarly not reluctant to try to enjoin the president now.
John, in your professional opinion, how do you see this playing out? Do you see the president coming out on top of this?
Yes. At the end of the day, I predict that he likely will in a court of law. But, I'm not a betting man, and I wouldn't place any bets on this.
Said he thinks they will do very well in the Ninth Circuit, calling it an open and closed case. John?
Ben Kennedy at the White House. Well, Bernie Sanders is heading back to the campaign trail. The independent senator from Vermont making it official today. He's running for president again. Sanders lost the Democratic nomination to Hillary Clinton in 2016, but says his progressive policy ideas have gained momentum and gone mainstream. The senator faced criticism last time around for pivoting away from questions about racial issues to hit on the economy instead. Today's announcement made clear he is not shying away from race in his second run.
Our campaign is about redoubling our efforts to end racism, sexism, homophobia, religious bigotry, and all forms of discrimination. We are running against a president who is a pathological liar, a fraud, a racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, and someone who is undermining American democracy as he leads us in an authoritarian direction. Women and men, black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, young and old, native-born and immigrant. Now is the time for us to stand together.
Well, the race for the Democratic nomination is set to be the most diverse in history. Democratic candidates are already making bold declarations about inequality along racial and ethnic lines. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker became the second black senator to enter the race. His announcement coming after California Senator Kamala Harris launched her campaign on Martin Luther King Day. One poll found black voters were 29% more likely to support black candidates who made positive racial appeals, as opposed to those who made no racial appeals at all.
Well, joining us now for more is Justin Giboney, founder and president of the AND campaign and a 2016 Democratic National Convention delegate. Justin, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first question, given that the 2020 field of candidates is already the most diverse in history, how much of a factor do you think race will play in this campaign?
Oh, it'll play a factor. I think it'll be played up quite a bit. And just through the history of the country, race has always somewhat been a factor. So it's going to be spread out a little bit because there's not just one candidate that's an African-American or that's, that's another minority, but it'll definitely be an issue.
Well, so when you say it'll definitely be an issue, how do you think it'll play out?
Well, I think people are asking questions. They want to know, is there something in the agenda that will speak to the race problem, that will speak to disparities in education and things of that nature? And so people are going to be asking those questions. I think the candidates will be forced to kind of put out there what their thoughts are and what they plan to do about it.
Yeah, Justin, do you think candidates are wise to kind of play up the race factor, or should they sort of, push it to the side and make other issues more important?
Yeah, I don't know if it's wise necessarily to play it up, but it should be addressed. And so I think the policy should say, look, I understand within the historical context what race has meant in America, that there are still disparities that need to be dealt with. And so a wise candidate will have policy that addresses that in one way or another.
And what about the difference, between Kamala Harris and Cory Booker? Both African Americans, but they're talking about race pretty differently, at least so far.
Yeah, it seems like Booker's been a little more strong in how he's addressed it in some ways, a little more policy oriented. But I think it's so early. We're going to get a chance to see exactly what the differences between those two are. They're two very smart candidates. We're going to see what, how they're going to distinguish themselves in the coming months. And so I don't want to jump out there too early. But yeah, they certainly started off a little differently in how they've spoken about it.
Justin, final question for you. What if the nominee ends up being a male or a non-minority? Would it be seen as a loss or missed opportunity for the Democratic ticket, given that this White House field of hopefuls is so different from what we've seen in the past?
Yeah. While race matters, I think at the end of the day, we have to have the best candidate. And thank God, there are qualified candidates from a lot of different races, from both sexes. But we have to get the best candidate because there are people out there suffering. We need answers, and we need the person who's most qualified to be in that position. So I don't see it as a loss as long as the best candidate gets in there.
All right. I know we're jumping way ahead, and I know you just said final question. But given this diverse field of candidates, is there anyone who you're kind of keeping an eye out on right now?
My eyes are on everyone. I'm looking at everyone's policies. I'm looking how they respond to the questions. Do they seem to be sincere? How do they feel about faith issues, things of that nature? So my eyes are on everyone. We haven't cut it down. It's too soon for all of that. I mean, everyone's not even in the picture yet. We don't even know who all the candidates are. So we're keeping an eye out on everybody.
All right.
Fair answer.
Yeah, fair answer. Justin Giboney with the AND campaign. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, in other news, President Trump is calling out Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. At a Florida rally Monday night, the president said the U.S. stands with interim President Juan Guaido, who was appointed by the country's legislature. It contends Maduro stole the most recent election. Trump called on Venezuela's military to back Guaido and issued a warning to those who continue to support Maduro.
If you choose this path, you will find no safe harbor, no easy exit, and no way out. You will lose everything.
And the weeks-long standoff has only worsened an already terrible humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. Maduro has used the military to block international aid from entering the country.
Well, Maduro not only refuses to budge, he's also blocking international relief aid from entering the country. Florida Senator Marco Rubio flew to neighboring Colombia this week to put pressure on the Venezuelan strongman.
CBN correspondent Chuck Holton was there and has this next story.
As the tragedy that is Venezuela reaches new levels of misery, nobody's quite sure who's in charge of the country. 50 nations now recognize Juan Guaido as the interim president, but one person in particular strongly disagrees. That's Nicolas Maduro, the man who's been running the country since 2013. But with more than 3 million Venezuelans having fled their homeland, and many of those left inside literally starving, here in the border town of Cúcuta, Colombia, tensions along the border are coming to a head. American military aircraft have been arriving here over the past week, delivering tons of humanitarian aid intended to ease the suffering of these Venezuelans. But troops loyal to Nicolas Maduro have so far blocked the shipments from entering their country. Maduro has called the shipments unnecessary and a political stunt, but these Venezuelans beg to differ.
We need help right now. You know, our people are there, starving, dying, just waiting for what? They can't waste any more time. We need help right away. Please help American people. We need you. We need you. We beg your help.
Over the weekend, a congressional delegation from the U.S. arrived at the border to see the situation, accompanied by the Colombian ambassador to the United States, Francisco Santos Calderon.
Even though the dictator is saying that this is a provocation, the only answer that we have for him is that this is an act of love. This is an act of Christianity. This is an act that shows the moral compass of those who cannot stand by seeing the suffering of millions and millions of Venezuelans that come across this bridge dying of hunger, dying because of lack of medicine.
Senator Marco Rubio from Florida was also in attendance.
What is happening here today, what is happening in Venezuela is a man-made crisis of epic proportions, not caused by a natural disaster, but by a man-made one. A criminal regime that is willing to starve and kill its own people before it gives up power.
But many of those attending Sunday worship services across this city are clinging to hope for change in Venezuela and praying for peace in the process. In Cúcuta, Colombia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Coming up, from pastor to prison, a shocking story of abuse within the church and how to protect against it. Catholic leaders from around the world will meet in Rome this week as the fallout continues over decades of sex abuse scandals.
But as Amber Strong reports, they could run into a new storm brewing inside the church.
The cloud hanging over the Catholic Church is getting darker as a new report reveals the church produced secret documents to deal with children born to priests. In a statement, a Vatican spokesperson told the New York Times, "I can confirm these guidelines exist. It is an internal document." These sons and daughters, referred to as children of the ordained, have been usually kept out of the public eye.
When you're hidden, you are characterized by secrecy.
What does secrecy do to a child?
It eats away at their sense of worth.
As one of those hidden children, Vincent Doyle is now shedding light and helping those like himself. His website, Coping International, provides resources to some 50,000 users. This latest element is just a part of the sexual abuse scandal the church hopes to address with this upcoming meeting. The Protection of Minors in the Church conference will bring together the Pope, bishops from around the world, and survivors.
I'm hopeful that the church will come out with direct actions that are going to keep children safer today and help survivors to heal.
Both abuse and its cover-up can no longer be tolerated.
The meeting comes on the heels of the Pontiff's decision to defrock former Washington, D.C. Archbishop Theodore McCarrick. McCarrick is accused of abusing minors and seminary students for years.
The fact that it takes this takes place on the eve of the historic summit is a depressing sign that it takes bad publicity and a tsunami of criticism before this Pope finally does the right thing.
In an attempt to pull back the curtain of secrecy, the church plans to stream parts of that conference on the web so the public can judge for itself. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
Well, the nation's largest evangelical denomination is taking steps to address widespread sexual abuse in its churches throughout the United States. During an urgent meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention leaders Monday, SBC President J.D. Greer announced the possibility of creating a sexual abuse database of accused pastors. This comes after 2 Texas newspapers jointly published a bombshell investigation that found over the course of 2 decades, more than 700 victims suffered from sexual misconduct or crimes at the hands of some 400 SBC leaders.
Well, Pastor Jimmy Hinton never suspected that something evil was going on in his church. Then he met with a young woman who delivered explosive news that would rock not only his church, but his own family.
Heather Sells brings us that story from Somerset, Pennsylvania.
Clara and John Hinton married in 1970 at the small Christian college where they met, and 2 years later they moved east to start their dream ministry.
We were kids when we moved to Somerset, Pennsylvania. We were 22 years old. I had prayed from a young child up for a Christian husband. That's all I ever wanted, was a Christian husband, and I wanted to be a Christian wife and mother.
John became pastor of the Church of Christ, and they went on to have a large family, 11 children.
He was very relaxed and very calm, very kind. He was great with the kids. He was their go-to person. He was my spiritual leader. We would spend many hours talking about God and our faith.
She and many others considered John to be a super dad. Their 5th son, Jimmy, adored his dad, and as he grew older, began to appreciate his ministry.
I remember sitting in the pews here and hearing him preach and hearing the passion behind it. And, he just knew his Bible really well. And I just remember thinking, I want to be standing up there one day. I want to be making a difference in the world one day.
Both dreams would come true, but not in the way Jimmy had hoped. Even as Clara and Jimmy perceived an ideal family, John Hinton kept a double life hidden that neither ever suspected. Although Clara did struggle to understand some of his behavior.
He would just do off-the-wall things. For instance, he would be preaching and do really weird things. He threw a lit firecracker in the auditorium one morning, and it's like, why do you do this stuff?
Another time, one of their daughters found him locked in his office looking at pornography. He later said he was doing sermon prep. But one of his victims was growing up, and at age 20 realized not only had Hinton abused her, he was likely abusing others. That victim was Hinton's youngest daughter.
I saw this picture of my dad touching me in an inappropriate way, but it was one of those things that I would try to play it off like, oh, he wouldn't actually do that to me. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe I'm not remembering something correctly, or I just kept trying to brush it off.
But when he asked her to help him babysit, she could no longer brush it off.
One of the kids had said that she loved spending the night at his house. And she had asked him that day, are we spending the night at your house tonight, Mr. John? And can we sleep in your bed?
Alex began to research and discovered her dad matched the profile of an abuser. and she matched the profile of a victim. But should she tell? After weeks of indecision, she went to her mom.
At that moment, it was like a million light bulbs went off, because so many little fragments of things that happened all along the years.
It became clear that they must tell Jimmy, son, brother, and current pastor of the church. Alex made an appointment to meet him.
It just takes the breath away from you. And I looked up and she was crying and I started to cry. I said, I believe you. And I think she needed to hear that. And the way I describe it is, I really think that was the Holy Spirit putting those words on my lips in that moment, because I really think she had to hear that.
That very weekend, Jimmy had to officiate a church wedding with his father present. He found it excruciating to keep this news secret. But the next decision, whether to report his dad to authorities, came much easier.
You had so much to lose by reporting.
Yes, I had everything to lose.
So why was that a snap decision for you?
Because I had to know. I had to know the truth. And reporting it and having it investigated by professionals was the only way that we were going to find out the truth.
Police charged Hinton with 200 counts, including rape of a child and indecent assault of a child. His sentence, a minimum of 30 years behind bars. His family never expects to see him again, but 7 years later is still working through what happened. Jimmy remembers the community's early misplaced sympathy for his dad.
When he got arrested, they would ask me, how's your dad doing? How's your dad doing? And at first I would answer it and I would be polite, but then after a while I just thought, not one person has asked how my dad's victims are doing. And so I started to answer people. I'd say, well, he's doing fine. It's his victims who aren't doing well.
Alex has traveled a road that is not uncommon for abuse victims of spiritual leaders. She stopped attending church and has no desire to go back to her faith.
I don't like the idea of God as a fatherly being, clearly. If that's who he is, he wasn't there for me. If my dad was supposed to be someone who was spreading his word, that's not the case at all.
As Jimmy Hinton has said, the devil got inside our family and none of us saw it. But today, Hinton, his mother, and his sister are seeing much more clearly. And they want other families and churches to know that sometimes someone close to you is an abuser.
Today, the Church of Christ has new measures to protect kids. Each classroom has a lock to keep empty rooms empty. And church policy protects children from potentially unwanted contact.
None of us can walk up to a kid, pull a kid in, and initiate that physical contact. And I think that's really important because abusers very subtly initiate physical contact, and that's how they begin what people call the grooming process.
Boz Chavijan founded the nonprofit Grace to help churches think through abuse. Many, he says, are quick to believe abusers.
What you'll often see is an abuser responding to an allegation in a way that spins a narrative that they're the actual victim. And then what ends up happening over the time period is the people around them, the people that are naturally would gravitate towards wanting to support them anyway, buy into that narrative. And now the abuser is the victim. The victim now is seen as sort of the perpetrator, the one causing the problems.
Chavijan says churches will be best prepared to prevent abuse and respond to it if they've taken the time to create a policy. Such plans help church members know what to report and to whom, and they help leaders respond. Clara and Jimmy now co-host a podcast designed to share what they've learned. They want others to know how easy it is to be fooled.
What's interesting in a sad, sad way is he preached about such things, about being harmful to children, and he was this great dad. It was like he's two people. He was this wonderful, loving, kind man, and he was one of the most evil, vile men that ever was.
And that was Heather Sells reporting. Well, if you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual assault, we invite you to go to our website, cbnnews.com. There you will find a list of organizations you can contact for help, including the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which will connect you with trained counselors in your area. We'll be right back. The powerful winter storm is making its way across the country.
That's right. 39 states, including every state east of the Mississippi, will be hit with snow, sleet, ice, rain, and possible flooding in the next few days. From the Midwest to mid-Atlantic, more than 100 million people are expected to be affected by the winter weather. Folks from Omaha, Nebraska, up toward Minneapolis are bracing for the brunt of the storm, with winter weather alerts stretching all the way from Arizona to New Jersey.
That's when you say, thanks a lot, Punxsutawney Phil.
That's right. He clearly got it wrong. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.